Hey guys, well, let's begin. Tonight we slip into a world where everything looks glorious from a distance. Gleaming armor, charging war horses, a banner snapping in the wind. But zoom in, and you're sweating, suffocating and slowly losing circulation in your thighs. Welcome to the life of a medieval knight. You stand in the courtyard, sunlight glinting off polished steel, and you can barely move your head. The helmet clamps down on your vision like a vice, and each breath sounds like it's echoing inside a soup can. Your armor, this status symbol of strength, is about 60 pounds of metal strapped to your entire body. You're not walking, you're lumbering, like a very shiny turtle. To be honest, you probably won't survive this. There's already a trickle of sweat running down your back and it's not even noon. No one tells you how bad armor smells after an hour, or how every joint pinches at just the wrong angle. You want to scratch your nose? Too bad. It's buried under a steel grill. Need to use the bathroom? Yeah. Better figure that out before you suit up. So, before the lights go out, click like and subscribe, but only if you're brave enough to return tomorrow night. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, because somewhere, someone's probably trying to fall asleep in full chainmail. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, because silence makes this story worse, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The problem with knightly armor isn't just the weight, it's the design. Sure, it looks majestic in museums now, but try walking upstairs in greaves and sabatonies. Your knees barely bend, your elbows catch, and you're constantly terrified of tipping over. And if you fall, good luck getting back up without help. It's like flipping a refrigerator and expecting it to stand back on its own. Historians still argue whether most knights actually wore full plate armor into battle regularly, or if it was reserved mostly for tournaments and rich nobles showing off. What's certain is that real combat wasn't the elegant swordplay from the movies. It was gritty, disorienting and loud, especially when your own armor echoed every clang like you were trapped inside a trash bin during a hailstorm. The armor didn't come in one size either. It was custom made, and if it wasn't made well, it could rub your skin raw. Knights used to wear thick, padded garments underneath called gambesons, partly for cushioning, partly for absorbing sweat. And believe me, there was plenty of sweat. On hot days, your armor became a slow cooking. On cold ones, it was like sleeping in a damp car. You'd think all this discomfort would mean knights stayed armored only for battles, right? Nope. Ceremonial parades, official appearances, even tournaments. Many knights wore their full gear just to show off. Imagine putting on an entire gym's worth of weight just to go shake hands with a duke. And that shining steel, it didn't stay shiny, it rusted. Fast. Your squire had to scrub it constantly with sand or vinegar, or even urine. Yes, actual pee. There's your quirky tidbit for tonight. If your armor had a weird smell, it wasn't just sweat. It was the romantic ideal of a knight galloping into the sunset in a sparkling suit of armor skips the part where he couldn't see where he was going. Helmets often had narrow slits that gave you the peripheral vision of a horse wearing blinders. Charging forward at full speed with a lance was half bravery, half educated guess. And let's not forget the noise. Every movement rattled and clanged, especially chainmail. If you were trying to sneak around, good luck. You sounded like a kitchen cupboard falling over. Enemy archers could probably hear you from across the field and laugh while they aimed. Even the famous suits of armor from the late Middle Ages, like the ones in royal collections, weren't perfect. Some were decorative, never meant to be worn. Others were so tight they left bruises, and yet knights persisted. Because armor meant status, it meant survival, and it meant you didn't have to die immediately when someone swung a mace at your chest. But let's say you did get hit. That glorious steel plate might stop a sword, but a direct blow from a blunt weapon, that would crush the armor inward, right into your ribs. Imagine being inside a soda can someone steps on. So yes, it looked cool, but it still hurt. A lot. Still, armor evolved. Early knights wore chainmail, little metal rings stitched together like scaly pajamas. It offered flexibility, but it didn't stop arrows very well. By the 14th century, full plate armor became popular. It was heavier but gave better protection. The most advanced suits even had features like sliding joints and locking helmets. Early versions of Iron Man tech, without the flight option. Despite everything, knights took pride in their gear. It was a symbol of their identity. You were your armor. Without it, you were just a guy with a sword and some really stiff posture. And don't think armor was just for battle. Sometimes it was used in courtly events, like knightly tournaments. Basically medieval pro wrestling, but with fewer safety rules. Jousting, melee combats, and pageantry all required heavy armor, even if the stakes were less deadly. Less deadly doesn't mean not deadly. People still got concussed or skewered. Funny how armor, meant to protect you, could also be your undoing. Drown in it, overheat in it, or simply tip over into a moat. It was the ultimate double-edged sword, glorious and deadly, empowering and imprisoning. So tonight, as you slowly drift off, imagine standing beneath a stone tower, dawn just breaking, your helmet creaking as you nod. Your breath fogs the air inside the steel mask. Your shoulders ache. Your feet tingle from lack of circulation. But you're a knight, at least until someone knocks you over. You're 7 years old and your job is to clean mud off a grown man's boots with a rag made of horsehair and regret. Welcome to pagehood, the first humiliating step in your noble knightly journey. No sword, no glory, just a splintered broomstick and a terrifying old knight named Sir Godfrey, who smells like onions and never blinks. Training to become a knight isn't all horseback rides and heroic drills. It starts early, very early. If you're lucky enough to be born into the minor nobility, your parents ship you off around age 7 to another noble household. Why? Because nothing builds character like scrubbing chamber pots for strangers in drafty stone hallways. Your official title is page. That means servant, errand runner, and occasional tutu for bored squires. You're expected to learn manners, religious devotions, and, eventually, basic combat. But most of your days are spent chasing lost falcons, polishing armor, and trying not to drop trays of mutton in front of visiting barons. Historians still argue whether page training was more about etiquette or endurance, but, either way, it's basically medieval hazing. At this point, you're too small to lift a real sword, so you get a wooden stick that gives you splinters in 3 different fingers. You swing it around in the courtyard until your arms feel like boiled noodles. Your instructor, a grumpy veteran who retired with 1 eye and 0 patience, yells at you for blinking too much. And then there are the horses, big, snorting, unpredictable mountains of muscle. As a page, you start your equestrian education. Translation, you learn to ride. And fall off. A pony that hates you personally? Ever been launched into a pile of hay by a bored gelding? You will, probably twice before lunch. Still, every morning, you lace up your worn-out boots and bow when Sir Godfrey passes, hoping he doesn't notice your tunic's covered in last night's stew. Because one day, someday, you'll become a squire. That's when the real action starts, supposedly. When you hit about 14, if you've survived falling down the stairs and managed not to poison a guest with undercooked goose, you're promoted to squire. You're still not a knight, but you finally get a sword, though you mostly carry someone else's. As a squire, you're assigned to a knight. Your life becomes a loop of sharpening blades, cleaning armor, feeding horses, and applying ointments to your master's extremely unchivalrous saddle rash. Your reward? The occasional combat lesson, and the pleasure of watching your knight flirt with duchesses who clearly aren't impressed. But don't worry, you'll get your turn at danger. If your knight rides off to battle, you follow, carrying his gear, setting up camp and trying not to get trampled. You might not fight directly, but you'll be close enough to smell the blood, feel the tremors, and maybe dodge a few stray arrows. Oh, and don't forget your own armor, which probably doesn't fit, because it used to belong to your knight's cousin's dead nephew. Quirky tidbit? Some squires were expected to sleep beside their knight's armor to guard it overnight. Imagine curling up next to a full suit of metal that clanks every time you breathe. Sweet dreams, right? You're also learning the finer points of courtly behavior, how to bow without tripping, how to carve meat like a civilized human, and how to nod solemnly while monks chant in Latin. It's like finishing school, but but with more bruises and random goose attacks. One particular challenge? Joust practice. You're handed a practice lance, plopped onto a jittery horse, and told to aim for a target that moves way faster than you expect. You miss. Repeatedly. You hit a haystack, you hit a wall, you hit yourself once, somehow. Your knight laughs, your horse rolls its eyes. Still, you're slowly getting better. You memorize prayers. You learn how to hold a sword without slicing your foot. You even win a practice duel once, though it might have been a sympathy win. Every scar you collect tells a story. Like the time you tried to impress a kitchen maid by vaulting onto a horse and broke your ankle. Or when you challenged another squire to a wrestling match and both of you rolled into a pile of pig manure. By your late teens, you're practically counting the days until your accolade, the ceremony where you're officially dubbed a knight. You dream of kneeling before a king, hearing your name echoed through the halls, and rising with the sword tapping your shoulder like a magic wand. Historians still debate whether all squires went through formal knighting ceremonies, or if many just sort of became knights through battlefield necessity. Records are spotty, and sometimes your big break came not in a chapel, but after your knight took a crossbow bolt to the leg, and someone needed to take charge. Still, for most, the path was long, rough, and full of moments that smelled like wet leather and desperation. And let's be honest, some boys never made it past pagehood. Accidents happened. Training injuries were common. Horses kicked. Swords slipped. Dysentery made surprise appearances. Being a noble child didn't make you invincible. If anything, it just meant your bruises came with slightly better embroidery. But for those who did make it, they were proud. Calloused hands, broken noses and all. Becoming a knight was like earning a lifelong badge of honor. Granted, a badge that could also get you killed in the next pointless border skirmish. As you lay there now, sinking into your pillow, picture yourself curled on a straw mat, firelight flickering on stone walls, your limbs sore from a day of wooden swords and horse manure. You're one step closer to knighthood, and several years away from realizing just how overrated that shiny helmet really is. You've made it. You're a knight. You've endured years of squiring, countless bruises, and a very public vomiting incident during your first joust. But now you stand tall, sword at your side, your very own banner fluttering in the breeze. You're sworn to a code, an ancient noble creed. Chivalry, honor, bravery, courtesy. Except, you're freezing your chainmail off in a swamp. You haven't bathed in a week. And your noble cause today is protecting a grain cart from bandits who might just be starving peasants. Turns out, chivalry is a little more complicated when it involves actual humans and less glamorous smells. The chivalric code, this lofty set of ideals, is the medieval knight's instruction manual for moral behavior. It preaches loyalty to your lord, protection of the weak, honesty, piety, and a gentle hand toward women. It's also, to be honest, more aspirational than practical. Historians still argue whether chivalry was ever truly followed, or if it was just really good medieval marketing. Because let's face it, you're not quoting poetry in the middle of a battlefield. You're swinging a mace at a guy wearing the same crest as your cousin, hoping not to get stabbed in the leg again. Chivalry might tell you not to kill a surrendered foe, but sometimes surrender just looks like reaching for another dagger. Your lord expects loyalty, the church expects piety, the locals expect protection, and your stomach expects dinner, ideally one that doesn't crawl off the plate. There's no manual for juggling all that. But hey, your horse hasn't bitten you today, so maybe it's going to be a good one. That said, there were knights who tried to live by the code. They fasted on holy days, confessed their sins before battle, and tried not to trample peasant fields when marching through villages. Some even composed flowery poems about unattainable noblewomen. Quirky tidbit: a few knights got so obsessed with courtly love, they'd wear a lady's undergarments into battle for luck. Not super aerodynamic, but certainly committed. And yes, the protection of the weak part sounds noble, but it didn't always apply equally. If you were a noble woman or a fellow Christian, you had a better shot. But if you were a non-Christian during a crusade, or a peasant who owed taxes, protection got a lot more flexible. Chivalry, at its core, was about image. It painted knights as warrior saints, defenders of the innocent. But real life? Not so polished. Knights burned villages during sieges. They sometimes looted monasteries. Some were mercenaries, hired not for justice, but for how well they could flatten a line of enemy infantry. And even within noble circles, chivalry was often wielded like a social sword, used to shame rivals, impress potential patrons, or boost one's standing at court. You might be brave, but if you didn't know how to speak with honeyed words or kneel gracefully before a duchess, you could still get laughed out of the hall. Still, the ideal persisted. Knights were expected to act as moral examples, even if their actual example involved some very morally grey decisions. They wrote oaths. They trained in virtue. They tried to balance the sacred with the savage. And oh, the pageantry, the ceremonies, the tournaments, the feasts where you were expected to perform your chivalric virtue with a turkey leg in one hand and a goblet in the other. You were supposed to tell tales of valor, quote scripture, and praise ladies without making eye contact. Too much flirting? Scandal. Not enough? Rudeness. It was like navigating a minefield made of etiquette and roast boar. One famous knight, Geoffroy de Charly, even wrote a guidebook on how to behave chivalrously, though it mostly boiled down to fight bravely, don't cheat in tournaments, and don't be gross. Solid advice, honestly. Some orders of knighthood tried to hold the line. The Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights mixed warfare with religious devotion, holding themselves to strict codes of behavior. But even they weren't immune to corruption, scandal, or the occasional misstep involving gold, politics, or very bad choices in Jerusalem. And then there's the whole honoring women part. Chivalry adored the idea of womanhood, but mostly in a poetic, untouchable way. Real women? Often left out of the knightly narrative, unless they were damsels, nuns, or highborn ladies meant to inspire vague sonnets. Protection didn't always extend to the kitchen maid or the peasant widow. Reality, once again, couldn't quite live up to the dream. Still, knights believed in the code. Or at least, they believed in being seen as if they did. Chivalry was the original medieval PR campaign. It was meant to make war look righteous, violence look noble, and a sword-wielding man on horseback look like a hero instead of a glorified landlord with pointy shoes. Over time, the stories outshone the facts. Troubadours and chroniclers exaggerated the good, downplayed the bad, and polished every rough edge until the knight was more legend than man. By the time King Arthur and his Round Table hit the medieval bestseller lists, chivalry had gone full Hollywood. But you're stuck in the mud. Literally. Your boots come off, you drop your lance, and a goose just bit your thigh. You remember your training, your oaths, the songs sung in the great hall, and then your horse sneezes in your face. Welcome to chivalry, brave knight. Tonight, as you breathe in the cool hush of your room, imagine yourself kneeling on cold stone, hands folded, sword laid across your palms. You whisper a prayer to St. George, feel the ache in your back from hours in the saddle, and try to remember the last time you saw something other than armor polish. This is honor. This is chivalry. Or at least, this is what it's supposed to be. You finally have your own castle. You made it through training, survived the mud pit that was your first real battle, and now you've been rewarded with a sturdy pile of rocks surrounded by a moat, and probably at least 2 goats you didn't ask for. But as you step inside your stone sanctuary, expecting grandeur and warmth, reality hits. Hard. It's cold, damp, and smells faintly of pickled fish and mouldy straw. Let's be clear, castles weren't cozy. They were not luxurious medieval mansions with roaring fireplaces and feather beds. No, you're basically living inside a glorified stone refrigerator. Drafty corridors, echoing footsteps, and walls that leak when it rains. Your room? A chamber the size of a closet with a tiny slit for a window and hay stuffed in a sack for a mattress. The air is permanently damp, and that fireplace? It mostly fills your room with smoke and existential regret. But hey, at least it's yours. Sort of. You're expected to house soldiers, servants, visiting nobility, and the occasional runaway monk. Your private residence is basically an Airbnb for chaos. Your kitchen smells like boiled cabbage year-round, and the only bathtub on site is a big barrel you share with your squire on alternating fortnights. You hope. Historians still argue whether most castles were meant more for defense or for display. Either way, they weren't designed for comfort. They were about control. A castle was a statement. I own this land, I control the river, and yes, I am slightly miserable, but you can't tell from outside. Every morning you wake up to the sound of hooves clopping in the courtyard, chickens arguing beneath your window, and a steward knocking politely to inform you that half the grain stores have gone missing and your cousin wants to visit with 50 retainers. Again. The hall is where you eat, work, and host feasts that sound a lot better in bardic songs than they feel in person. The food? Sometimes delicious, more often questionable. Bread like bricks, meat that's either undercooked or oversmoked, and fish that might have been caught last week or month. You eat by torchlight, surrounded by tapestries that can't quite cover the damp creeping down the walls. Quirky tidbit. Some castles had garderobes, early versions of toilets, jutting out over moats or sheer drops. They drained straight down. That's right. You're technically living in a multi-level outhouse. And those walls you're so proud of? Rats live in them. They scratch at night. You try not to notice. You probably think you'll get a bit of rest here, maybe work on your sword technique, or finally read that dusty manuscript in the chapel. But no. You're a lord now, which means administration, taxes, crop yields, disputes between shepherds, and an endless stream of letters written in terrible Latin. You spend most days at a long wooden table, nodding while someone complains about stolen pigs. Again. And don't forget the defense drills. Your castle is a fortress after all. That means inspecting your guards, walking the battlements, and pretending you're not freezing through your chainmail while squinting into the horizon. You host archery practice in the yard, plan how to pour boiling oil on hypothetical invaders, and pray your stonework holds through the next siege season. But still, there are moments. On quiet nights, the moonlight filters through the harrow slits. You sit by the hearth, boots off, sipping lukewarm ale while your old squire, now captain, mutters a story you've heard a dozen times. You look out over your land, the forest, the river, the tiny village tucked into the hillside, and you feel it. Power, responsibility, a strange kind of peace, until someone bursts in to say the goats got into the chapel again. Castles were alive, noisy, chaotic, drafty, wonderful beasts of stone and timber. They creaked, shifted, and whispered in the night. You never truly felt alone, but rarely felt relaxed either. It was a place where you could be both the protector and the prisoner. Sometimes, if you were truly unlucky, your lord would visit. That meant panic. You'd clean everything, hang fresh rushes, slaughter extra pigs. Suddenly everyone had to wear their best tunics and act like the stew never ran out halfway through last Tuesday. And heaven forbid you were summoned to his castle. A multi-day ride, ceremonial armor, and 4 days of bad wine, gossip, and veiled threats disguised as jokes. Ah, Sir Edric, still have all your teeth, I see. Ha ha, you smile, you nod. You wonder how quickly you can ride back home without throwing out your back. The castle might be a symbol of power, but it comes with chores. Endless decisions. Food storage, water sourcing, repairing the roof, patching the moat, managing servants who gossip more than they sweep. Sometimes you long for your days as a squire, when your only job was to polish armor and not get yelled at for low wheat yields. And remember, you're not the only one living here. Your family's inside too. Your wife, children, steward, maybe a visiting cousin who's overstayed his welcome by 3 seasons. Privacy is a luxury. So is silence. Every room echoes. Every cough travels. You've perfected the art of whispering during council meetings and of smiling politely at dinner while everyone picks meat out of their teeth with knife peace. Even your chapel, the one place you can retreat for quiet prayer, doubles as storage for extra candles and last year's crossbow bolts. You kneel beside a broken stool, whisper your sins, and try not to sneeze from the incense smoke. So tonight, as you lie beneath your modern blankets, warmed by central heating and serenaded by the hum of electronics, spare a moment for your medieval self. Spare curled in a narrow bed, wrapped in itchy wool, dreaming of fewer drafts and better plumbing. The castle may be yours, but comfort is still centuries away. It's feast day and you've been looking forward to this for weeks. No patrolling muddy borders. No yelling at the steward about oat shortages. Tonight, you eat like a knight. You pull up a heavy oak bench beside a sagging trestle table, rub your hands together, and brace yourself for roast boar, honeyed tarts, and the finest ale your cellar can offer. Sounds glorious, right? Well, sort of. The feast looks impressive. Tables groan beneath silver dishes, flagons of wine clink together, and a lute player somewhere in the corner is bravely battling a broken string. But as you raise your goblet, something's off. The ale tastes like sour barley soup, the meat's tough enough to spark against your knife, and someone's definitely overcooked the pigeon pie again. Welcome to the medieval banquet, equal parts glamour and gastrointestinal gamble. Let's start with the ale. Water isn't safe, so you drink beer or wine. But beer, in the Middle Ages, often meant lukewarm, grainy liquid with floating bits of who knows what, and it's not always alcoholic enough to kill anything lurking in it. Some households spice it with herbs. Others, well, they trust your immune system. Good luck. Your bread? It's stale, on purpose. The bottom layer of the loaf, called a trencher, doubles as your plate. You pile food on it, let the grease soak in, then maybe hand it off to a servant or beggar. Or feed it to the dogs. You don't eat the trencher unless you're desperate. And tonight, you're trying to act noble, so you resist. Barely. Historians still argue whether banquets were daily affairs or rare celebrations reserved for special guests and holidays. One thing's clear, while the rich dined well, even their food wasn't always safe. Medieval kitchens didn't exactly have thermometers or hygiene regulations. Meat might sit out for hours, fish might arrive from the coast after 2 questionable days in a cart. You just cover it in spices and hope. Speaking of spices, those are your bling. Pepper, cinnamon, saffron, cloves. They cost more than some villagers. You sprinkle them liberally, not just for taste, but to show off. It's culinary status. A dish dripping with imported nutmeg says, "Yes, I have money." Also, please ignore the smell of that goose. Tonight's meal includes a meat jelly that trembles ominously every time someone laughs too hard. There's also a stew of questionable origin, a stuffed peacock with its feathers reattached purely for show, and a mysterious marchpane, sweet-shaped like a castle. You pick at it with a knife, unsure if it's food or furniture. But here's the thing. Eating is performance. You're seated according to rank. Your actions are being watched. Do you tear bread with your hands or cut it properly? Do you use a dagger with grace or shovel food in like a starving peasant? One false move and you're the talk of the castle for weeks. Remember Sir Ethelwood, who dropped a gravy-covered pheasant in his lap? Never lived it down. Quirky tidbit. Burping at the table could be considered polite in some courts. It meant you enjoyed the meal. But slurping too loudly? Scandalous. Medieval etiquette was a minefield, and you had to pretend to enjoy every bite, even if the goose tasted like pond water, and the custard had texture. Then there's the entertainment. A juggler with suspiciously sweaty hands tosses knives near your goblet. A troubadour sings a song about a lady and her lost cow, which, by the 5th verse, might be a metaphor. A small boy in a tunic recites Latin poetry while trying not to cry. You clap politely. You smile. You sip your sour ale and count the minutes until you can sneak away. And don't get too comfortable. Sometimes feasts end in arguments or duels. Once, a drunken knight challenged a minstrel to single combat over a plate of honey-glazed quail. You were there. The minstrel won. Barely. Later in the evening, the food gets heavier, the wine gets stronger. Someone always breaks into an old war story, slurring through the details while half the hall pretends to listen. You nod along, you drink, you pretend the rabbit pie isn't undercooked, and you try to remember if that particular servant was coughing during the last course. Food poisoning was a frequent guest at these feasts. So were parasites. The bread might have weevils, the cheese might fight back, and the ale, well, at this point, It's your third goblet, so you've stopped asking questions. Still, there's a charm to it. The firelight, the flickering candles, the laughter that echoes off cold stone walls, the clatter of wooden bowls and silver goblets. This is medieval comfort. Shared food, shared songs, a brief moment where war and taxes and itchy armor disappear behind roast meat and warm bread. Outside, the wind howls against the castle walls, but in here, you're surrounded by familiar faces, greasy, slightly drunk faces, but still, your fellow knights, your steward, your squire who just fell asleep into a plate of turnips. It's ridiculous, it's uncomfortable, and it's yours. As the evening winds down, you gnaw on the last of the venison and lean back against the cold stone wall, full but not entirely satisfied. Tomorrow you'll ride out again. Tomorrow you'll wear armor and shout at archers. But tonight, you feast. As your eyelids begin to flutter, imagine the crackle of the hearth, the low hum of a lute. It's a sunny afternoon in the courtyard and your squire is reading a letter aloud. Well, trying to. He stumbles over half the words, squints at the ink, then shrugs and hands it to you. You stare at the parchment. It's full of looping Latin script that may as well be a recipe for confusion. You nod wisely and pretend to understand, but let's be honest, you can't read. Welcome to knightly literacy, or the frequent lack thereof. Being a knight didn't automatically mean being educated. In fact, many knights could barely write their own names, or if they did, their signature looked suspiciously like a poorly drawn sword. Reading and writing were skills reserved mostly for monks, clerics, and the occasional overachieving noblewoman. You've got sword arms and saddle sores, not calligraphy skills. Historians still argue whether more knights could read than previously believed, especially in later medieval periods. But early on it was perfectly acceptable for a knight to have the literary range of a damp boot. You didn't need books to swing a mace. You needed muscles, loyalty, and a squire who knew how to spell siege. Your life is action-based, not document-based. Charters, land grants, letters from your liege lord, they're all read to you by scribes or priests. You listen, nod, and occasionally grunt like you're thinking deep thoughts. Then you tell your steward to handle it, and go off to inspect your chickens. Still, you feel the pressure. The bishop looks at you with raised brows. Your wife, who studied at a convent, sometimes quotes psalms just to remind you she can. Even your squire corrects your Latin pronunciation under his breath. You've started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't hurt to know what those squiggles actually mean. Quirky tidbit? Some knights practiced reading by tracing words carved into sword hilts or shields. Not to study tactics, just so they could eventually read prayers or their own motto without having to ask a monk. Talk about motivational flashcards with a deadly edge. Books are rare and valuable, handwritten by monks over months, sometimes years. Owning even one book means you're ridiculously rich or highly connected. And forget printing presses, Gutenberg's still centuries away. So unless your castle includes a small scriptorium, or you're besties with a literate abbot, your options are limited. When you do come across books, they're not usually the fun kind. Religious texts, moral treatises, lists of saints, long accounts of martyrdom. Bedtime reading was less epic saga and more penitential dread. If you're lucky, someone in your court might own a chanson de geste, an epic poem about knights doing heroic things while making questionable decisions. You enjoy the parts where people get bashed with flails, the rest, a bit wordy. Still, education isn't totally out of reach. Some knights take evening lessons from clergy. You try this once. After 3 sessions you can recognize 5 Latin words and fall asleep during the 6th. The priest is patient, the bench is hard, your pride is sore. You make more progress when the stories are told aloud. Tales of Roland, Arthur, Charlemagne. They light up your imagination. The idea of noble quests and enchanted swords and brave deeds, all passed from mouth to mouth like a communal campfire. Those are your books. Oral storytelling is your library, and it's often much more vivid than anything ink could trap on a page. Besides, there's practical knowledge to master. You can name every part of a warhorse's harness. You can tie 4 kinds of knots while blindfolded. You can calculate the food needed for 50 men on a 2-week march without writing anything down. Try getting a monk to do that. But there's a cost to illiteracy. It makes you dependent on priests, on scribes, on others to manage your accounts, your letters, your land dealings. It limits your autonomy, even as your sword wins you respect. And you know it. That tension simmers quietly beneath your chainmail. The awareness that your body may be strong, but your mind isn't armored the same way. Sometimes in the chapel, you stare at the stained glass, at the Latin inscriptions above the saints' heads, and feel a strange pull. Not envy, not quite, just a curiosity you can't satisfy on your own. You wonder what else is in those books the clerics clutch so tightly, and if any of it might explain why being a knight feels so much lonelier than the old songs promised. One winter evening, a travelling scholar visits your hall. He's thin, nervous, smells like old parchment, and talks so fast it's like he's afraid the words might escape. But when he speaks of faraway lands, ancient history and stars that guide ships, you listen. Not because you understand all of it, but because something in his voice stirs the same feeling you had as a page staring at his first sword. Wonder. Possibility. You try to ask questions, but stumble. Your words are blunt. He smiles kindly and answers anyway. That night, as the fire crackles low and the hall grows quiet, you think, maybe you'll ask the priest to teach you again, 1 word at a time. Even knights can learn slowly. And in truth, some do. A few go on to become diplomats, administrators, even authors. A knight who can read is a rarity, but not an impossibility. It's not just strength that wins a kingdom. Sometimes it's the man who can read the fine print. So as you lie in bed tonight, safe beneath the hush of a quieter world, imagine your fingers tracing letters carved into a dusty shield. You don't know them all yet, but you will, because even in an age of swords and war horses, knowledge still glows like a candle in the dark, flickering, fragile, but fiercely alive. You're crouched behind a barrel, chewing a crust of bread that's more weevil than wheat, watching your tent slowly collapse in the rain. You're not bleeding, yet, but your stomach's making noises that might attract wolves. And that's before we even get to the gutworms. Welcome to a knight's worst enemy. Not sword, not spear, just food. And whatever decided to move into your intestines uninvited. You see, everyone talks about the glory of battle, the honor of service, the grandeur of noble quests. But what they forget to mention is how much time knights spent feeling like death because of something they ate, or drank, or didn't eat because it crawled away first. Let's say you're on campaign. You've ridden for days, supplies are short, morale is shorter, and the bread has started talking back. You dunk it in wine to soften it. The wine is warm, the bread disintegrates. You eat it anyway. You have no choice. Historians still argue whether knights had better food than foot soldiers on campaign. Sure, in theory you had access to meat, dried fruits and imported luxuries. In practice, it depended on whether your baggage train made it through the last bandit ambush. Spoiler, it didn't. So you eat what you can. Salt pork, beans, stale oats, a turnip that's been in someone's pouch since Lent. And if things get really bad, you eat what's called hardtack, a baked, rock-hard biscuit that could chip teeth and probably be used as a projectile. It was tough, tasteless, and travelled well, which is more than you can say for half your fellow knights. But what really gets you, what always gets you, are the parasites. They come in many forms: tapeworms, roundworms, and something your physician calls the wrigglers. No one knows what they are exactly, just that they make your belly swell, your sleep twitchy, and your daily business complicated. Quirky tidbit: some medieval remedies for gutworms included eating crushed nettles, drinking vinegar, or, no joke, swallowing powdered toad bone. Does it work? Not really. But it sure makes you forget about your original problem for a while. And the water. Oh no, never trust the water. Rivers look clean but carry everything from upstream latrines to decomposing livestock. So you boil it, mix it with wine, or avoid it altogether. Still, that doesn't always work. One sip of the wrong stream and suddenly you're doing more squatting than swordplay. Your armor doesn't help. Wearing 50 pounds of steel in hot weather turns you into a walking stew pot. You sweat, you bake, and your body becomes a playground for rashes and skin infections. You take it off at night, and your gambus and squelches. Lovely. Sleep is no relief. The camps stink, everyone snores. Some nights have fleas, others have lice. Some are hiding cheese in their boots. You try to sleep sitting up because lying down invites coughing fits and back spasms. Your tent leaks, your blanket is damp, and the man 2 feet away is having loud, one-sided arguments with his own sword. And yet, you keep going, because that's what nights do. You grit your teeth, you pretend the gruel isn't moving, you pray over your food, even though you know divine intervention doesn't usually fix spoiled fish. Sometimes, when you're lucky, you stop at a village and get a fresh meal. Eggs, cheese, bread that only smells slightly strange. You eat like a king and thank the cook profusely. And then, 6 hours later, you're curled behind a haystack, rethinking every decision that brought you here. In peacetime, your food improves, slightly. You're back at your castle, and your cook knows how to make a stew that won't give you visions. But the parasites don't care. They hang around. They linger. You start to suspect you have names for them. One wakes you up at night. The other makes you dizzy after wine. And don't forget the other side of medieval health, disease, dirty utensils, questionable meat, undercooked bird of unknown species. You've lost more fellow knights to foodborne illness than actual battles. 1 minute they're biting into a celebratory roast, the next they're muttering about glowing cows and losing all motor function. You've heard of entire sieges ended because the garrison got sick from their own food stores. No glorious last stand, just groaning, sweating, and a collective miserable surrender. Still, some knights take pride in their digestive ironcladness. They claim they can eat anything. One man in your unit once drank goat's milk left out in the sun. He was fine. He also hasn't blinked in 3 weeks. You assume the two are connected. Meals on the march were less about nutrition and more about not dying. High calorie, high fat, whatever would fit in a saddlebag and not explode. Butter was a luxury. Honey was a miracle. Dried fruit was rare and mostly hoarded. When you got it, you savored every raisin like it was a relic. And yet, despite all of this, you survived. Somehow, your body adapted. Or surrendered. One day you realized the bread didn't taste quite so bad. The worms didn't wiggle quite as much. And the wine, still awful, but you drank it anyway. Because you're a knight, you fight battles, you serve lords, you recite your oaths with honor, even when you're clenching every muscle just to stay upright at court. So tonight, as you lie safe and warm in your modern bed, spare a sleepy thought for the medieval version of you, somewhere in a wet tent, surrounded by snoring comrades and a questionable stew, whispering a quiet prayer to St. Elmo that whatever's in your stomach will settle before dawn. The banner snaps in the wind. Dust stings your eyes. Your boots ache. Your mouth is dry. And you've been walking toward Jerusalem for the last 6 hours, and for the last 6 months. The crusade is not what you expected. No, scratch that. It's exactly what you feared. A long, brutal, dusty, and often pointless nightmare in armor. You signed up for glory, for God, for eternal salvation. The Pope promised a free ticket to heaven if you took the cross and fought in the Holy Land. Your priest made it sound like a pilgrimage with swords. Your lord told you it would be an honor, and your squire told you this was a very bad idea. Turns out, your squire was right. The First Crusade began in 1096, and by the time you're marching through blistering heat in the eastern Mediterranean, tens of thousands of knights, squires, foot soldiers, and curious nobles have already made the same journey. Some never came back. You try not to think about that. Historians still argue whether most knights joined for faith, fame, or loot. Maybe a bit of all three. Some came with genuine devotion. Others wanted land or riches or a chance to escape debts. You wanted meaning. something greater than border disputes and soggy feasts, something holy. But so far you've mostly found dysentery. The crusade is long. You travel across Europe on foot or horseback, relying on a tangled network of alliances and hand-scrawled maps that make everything look flatter and closer than it actually is. The roads are dangerous. Bandits, sickness, and hostile locals who aren't thrilled to see a hungry army walk through their fields, trampling everything edible. When you finally reach the Levant, it's hotter than you imagined. The sun turns your armor into a cooking pot. You sweat through your gambeson, your horse is foaming at the mouth, and you've eaten nothing but salted fish and regret for 3 days. Welcome to the Holy Land. You think the locals will be waiting with swords drawn and torches raised. Instead, many towns are silent, deserted. Others are full of people who just want you to move along and stop looting their grain. You begin to question your role in all this. The battles do happen, hard, confusing, chaotic clashes where you can't tell friend from foe. You ride forward in a blur of sand and shouts, barely able to keep your lance pointed in the right direction. You pray under your breath, swing your sword, and try not to fall off your horse when it stumbles over a broken cart. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes both sides lose, and the survivors wander off wondering what the point was. You lose good men, brave ones, stupid ones, friends. You see things you can't unsee. One knight tries to storm a tower, takes an arrow through the eye slit. Another drops dead from heat stroke mid-charge. And there's a moment, quiet, terrible, where you realize your sword has blood on it, and you don't know whose it is. And then come the sieges. You camp outside city walls for weeks, sometimes months. Supplies run thin, tempers run short. You're forced to eat horses, dogs, even leather boiled in broth. Quirky tidbit. There are stories, grisly ones, of some crusaders eating the bodies of their enemies. Whether or not they're true, the fact that anyone believed them says enough. You pray, constantly. Before meals, before sleep, before battle. You confess your sins to a priest who's just as dirty and sunburned as you are. You ask forgiveness for stealing extra rations, for hitting that one guy too hard during an argument, for doubting all of this. At night the air is dry and full of strange sounds, crickets, fire crackling, distant voices. You sit beside the embers, watching your comrades argue over a broken helmet. You miss home, the wet chill of your castle, the taste of cheese that didn't make your stomach spasm, even your squires whining. When Jerusalem finally appears on the horizon, it doesn't look holy. It looks like another walled city, another fight. The siege is brutal. You're lucky if you aren't injured, or worse, left to rot in the sun with the others who fell trying to climb the walls. But when the city falls, something strange happens. You expect elation, triumph. Instead you feel hollow, tired. You wander the streets, stepping over rubble, trying not to gag from the heat and the smoke. The glory doesn't taste how you imagined. It tastes like ash. There's no parade for you, no divine trumpet blast, just more orders, more waiting, and more awkward diplomatic dinners with people who speak languages you can't understand and smile in ways that feel vaguely threatening. And after all that, you go home. If you survive. You ride back with fewer friends, worse teeth, and a collection of strange scars you don't talk about. Your neighbors treat you like a hero. They ask for stories, you give them the edited versions, the ones with noble charges and valiant duels. You leave out the heatstroke and the worms. You hang your sword above your hearth. You polish your armor, even though it's cracked and dented. You try to sleep at night, but sometimes the dreams come. Burning cities, wailing voices, the heavy weight of everything you saw and did, in the name of faith. Still, you keep the cross stitched on your cloak. You want to believe it meant something, that it wasn't just suffering, that maybe, somehow, you helped shape history for the better. Tonight, as your modern world hums around you, imagine yourself wrapped in a thin wool blanket under a foreign sky. The stars above are the same, even if the world below feels lost. You breathe in the dry air, feel the ache in your legs, and whisper a prayer. Less for victory now, and more for peace. You tighten the saddle strap, check the reins, and take a long breath. In front of you, your warhorse, your destrier, snorts like it's already bored and wants to fight something, anything. Preferably not you, but you're not entirely sure. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Warhorses are terrifying. They are not your average village ploughboys. A knight's destrier is a walking tank with attitude. Huge, heavily muscled, trained for violence, and expensive enough to buy several small farms. And that's before you feed it. These horses eat more than your entire household staff, and they know it. Mounting up is an ordeal. In full armor, you can't just hop on. You need a squire, maybe two, and a prayer. You grab the saddle horn, plant one boot, and try to swing your leg high enough without pulling a hamstring. You land in the seat with a grunt, trying to look noble. Your destrier immediately shifts its weight in protest, just to remind you who's really in charge. Historians still argue whether destriers were used in actual battle as often as in tournaments and ceremonies. Many think knights preferred smaller, more agile horses for combat, and kept their show ponies for jousts. But when you do ride one into a melee, the effect is undeniably dramatic, and a little horrifying. Because these horses don't just carry you, they fight. They've been trained to rear, kick, trample, and bite. That's right, bite. Nothing quite ruins a squire's day like trying to shoe a horse that thinks fingers are snacks. And they have moods, big ones. You feed them the wrong hay, they sulk. Tighten a girth strap too quickly, they backstep into the blacksmith's forge. One destrier in your company used to fake lameness to avoid marchers, until someone caught it galloping across a field later that night, perfectly fine, just very dramatic. Quirky tidbit: destriers had names, often grandiose ones, not Charlie or Buttercup, more like Bloodthorn or Hammerwind. Your own horse is named Ironhoof. He earned it by kicking through a wooden stall door after someone tried to feed him apples he didn't approve of. Riding him into battle feels like riding a furry earthquake. He charges, hooves slamming into the earth with enough force to make foot soldiers reconsider their career choices. You lower your lance, steady your legs, and hope you're aimed at someone who flinches first. But here's the problem. Horses don't understand politics, or flags, or heraldry. They don't care if the man you're pointing at is a peasant with a pitchfork or a duke in gold plate. They care about noise, pain, motion. If you don't handle your destrier with absolute skill, it'll shy, spin, or bolt straight into a group of enemy spearmen, which you'd very much like to avoid. There's a reason knight training included years of horsemanship. It wasn't just about riding in a straight line. It was about staying on during chaos, turning under pressure, stopping without flying over the saddle, and above all, trusting that the half-ton beast beneath you wouldn't launch you headfirst into a river just for fun. Still, once you and your horse click, it's magic. You ride as one. You think left, he turns. You shift your weight, he pivots. You hear the whistle of arrows and feel his body twist instinctively, dodging before you even register the danger. You love him in your own gruff way. You clean his hooves at dusk, whisper to him after fights, share your dried apples. He might still bite you though, that's just part of the deal. The care of a warhorse is a full-time job. Your grooms brush, feed and exercise him. His tack, saddle, bridle, stirrups is custom fit. His hooves are shod by the best blacksmith you can afford. If his leg so much as trembles, the entire camp pauses to check it out. You might lose your sword, you might get injured, but if your horse goes down, the campaign is over. And if he dies, you bury him with honors, sometimes even with coins, like a noble. One knight in your company once carved a cross into a tree where his horse fell. He visits it every year. That's the kind of bond you build when you share every charge, every brush with death, every muddy stumble. And war horses do die. In battle, they're prime targets. You try to shield yours, but it's hard when arrows rain down like angry hornets. The scream of a dying horse is a sound you don't forget. Worse than any man, it echoes, lingers, makes you swear to walk into the next fight if you have to. But most of the time your destrier carries you home, bloodied, bruised, limping, but alive. He nuzzles your shoulder like he doesn't smell the gore, like he isn't just as exhausted. You rub his forehead and mutter thanks. He tries to eat your glove. You let him. Quieter moments, those are the best. A moonlit ride along the castle wall, a slow trot through a misty field. The world is silent, the stars above are ancient, and your destrier walks beside you like a ghost. It's the closest thing to peace you ever feel in this life. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your limbs grow heavy, picture yourself gently brushing down a massive warhorse, steam rising from its coat in the cold air. You whisper a joke to it, one it won't understand, but it flicks its ears anyway. And for just a moment, the battlefield fades, and all that remains is the steady rhythm of hooves, the soft clink of tack, and the quiet trust between you and your only real comrade. Dawn breaks. You're standing in a freshly scrubbed tunic, hair combed for the first time in weeks, sword polished to a blinding gleam. Your armor is laid out in perfect rows, every buckle fastened, every strap tightened. You're about to be knighted. Finally. The accolade, the moment you've dreamed of since you were a page sneezing into a chamber pot. It's all pomp and ritual, but don't let the sacred music and ceremonial robes fool you. You'll be back in the mud by sundown. The accolade ceremony is the official passage into knighthood. If you've made it this far, you've served as a page, survived squiring, maybe even fought in a campaign. Now you're about to kneel before your lord, or possibly a king, and be dubbed a knight with a solemn touch of the sword. One shoulder, the other. Rise, sir, whatever your name is. You did it. Sometimes it happens in a great hall, lit with flickering torches and echoing with Gregorian chant. Other times it's on a battlefield, the air thick with smoke and victory. Or desperation, because truthfully, a lot of knights didn't get flowery ceremonies. They got hasty battlefield promotions. Congratulations, you didn't die. Here's your title, and a wound that'll never fully heal. Historians still argue whether the full chivalric ritual, fasting, confession, prayer, vigil, bath, was common practice or rare showmanship. The romantic version? You spend the night before in prayer, armor beside you, sword blessed by a priest. You don't speak. You contemplate virtue, duty, and how not to fart during the ceremony. The next morning you bathe, scrub down, body and soul. You dress in white, purity. Red, strength. Black, death. The symbolism is heavier than your breastplate. Then you're led before the court, all eyes on you, and you kneel, heart pounding, wondering if your knees will give out before they finish saying your name. Then comes the sword, a tap on each shoulder, or sometimes a full slap across the neck, a tradition meant to be the last blow you take without striking back. One knight got knocked clean off his feet. It was meant with affection. Supposedly. You rise, slightly dazed, slightly sore, fully knighted. Everyone claps. The feast begins. There's music, roast meats, and, if you're lucky, a bard who rhymes your name with valor, and not Fallonia. A noble lady might tie a ribbon to your arm. You try not to trip over your spurs. It's glorious, it's exhilarating, it's also short-lived. Because the moment the ceremony ends, you're expected to do knight stuff. No breaks, no orientation. You're sent off to escort a merchant caravan or settle a land dispute, or deal with a wild boar terrorizing the village. Spoiler, boars are worse than bandits. Your first real task might be laughably unheroic. One knight in your company was immediately ordered to oversee the building of a grain storage shed. He cried a little. Then he found the lumber and got to work. And being knighted doesn't make you invincible or smart. One overexcited young knight rode off to challenge a rival before learning how to steer his horse properly. He ended up in a pond. He claimed it was intentional. No one believed him. You're now allowed to bear arms, command men, enforce justice, and wear the spur of knighthood. Literally, a shiny badge for your heels that clinks with every step. You practice your new gait in private, so you don't trip over them in the great hall. But with title comes responsibility. Land, tenants, letters from your liege, tax disputes. You thought it'd be dragon slaying and tournaments. It's mostly meetings. Still, Your first real battle as a knight is something you never forget. You ride in, not as someone's servant, but as a leader. Your voice carries weight. Your sword is your own. Your banner flutters behind you, stitched by your household seamstress, who told you not to mess it up in the mud. You immediately mess it up in the mud. You charge, you yell, you pray, you survive. And afterward, you get the kind welcome, a hunk of bread, a grimly blanket, and a pat on the back from a grizzled veteran who once fought with his shoe on the wrong foot for 2 straight hours. Glory is subtle, muddy, loud. Quirky tidbit. Some knights took their new status very seriously. So seriously that they refused to eat with commoners or wear anything less than silk-lined tunics. These men usually got punched, often by other knights. Still, being a knight means something. It's the moment your life splits, before and after. Pagehood is gone, squiring is over. Now you're on the list. You're sworn to chivalry, bound by duty, and saddled with the weight of your armor and your new social expectations. It doesn't change who you are. You still like sleeping late. You still flinch when the cook throws things. You still wonder if your warhorse hates you. But now, when you enter the hall, people stand. When you speak, they listen. When you ride through the village, the children stop and stare. You nod at them like you're cool. You are not. At night you sit by the fire polishing your sword, going over the ceremony in your head. Did the Lord really say your name correctly? Did your knee creak when you knelt? Did you bow too low when the Baroness smiled at you? It doesn't matter. You're a knight. As you lie back now, soft blanket tucked around you, picture yourself newly knighted, still awkward in your polished armor, still sore from kneeling too long, but proud, quietly proud. Your journey has truly begun, and though it's dirtier and stranger than the song suggested, it's yours. The sun glares down on the jousting field. You squint through the narrow slit in your helmet, adjust your grip on the lance, and feel your heartbeat echoing inside your chest, like someone's banging a drum in a tin bucket. Across from you, another knight lowers his own lance. You don't know him. You probably won't like him. In a few seconds, one of you will hit the dirt. And you volunteered for this. Jousting. It looks noble, majestic. 2 warriors thundering toward each other on horseback, banners flying, armor gleaming. But underneath the pageantry is a brutal truth. It's organized, ritualized, high-speed, blunt-force trauma. The rules are simple. You ride at each other as fast as possible, trying to hit your opponent square in the chest, or better yet, knock him off his horse. If you break your lance, good. That means you struck hard enough. If you break his ribs, even better. The crowd loves that. Quirky tidbit. The splinters from a shattered lance could be enormous, but like carrot-sized wooden daggers flying through the air. It wasn't uncommon to finish a joust with one sticking out of your shoulder like an unfortunate kebab. The first time you joust, it's terrifying. Your horse, already a bit of a diva, wants to veer off. Your armor shifts awkwardly, and you can't quite see straight. Your lance feels like it weighs 100 pounds, and you keep forgetting which arm to lower when. And then the trumpet blares, and everything else vanishes in a blur of hooves, wind, and hope. You feel the impact through your whole body. You lurch back. You don't fall, but your shoulder's going to remember that hit for a month. The other knight grins as he circles back. You nod, do your best to look dignified, and try not to vomit inside your helmet. Historians still argue whether jousting was ever intended to simulate actual combat. Some say it was just a sport. Others claim it began as battlefield training that got increasingly ridiculous over time. By the 14th century, it had become a full-blown spectacle, almost a performance art, with a high risk of skull fractures. You compete in tournaments throughout the year. They're grand affairs, complete with feasts, music, and ladies throwing favourite ribbons, garlands, sometimes handkerchiefs that may or may not have been washed this decade. You tie one to your arm and pretend you know whose it is. You don't, but it flutters dramatically. Between jousts, there are melee contests. Giant free-for-alls, where dozens of knights bash each other with blunted weapons. It's less about winning and more about surviving with your limbs intact. One knight, took a mace to the face, lost 2 teeth, and still won the round. He celebrated by drinking soup through a straw. The injuries are real. Broken bones, concussions, punctured lungs. Some knights never fully recover. A few die, sometimes from the hit, sometimes from falling badly. There are no soft landings when you're wearing 60 pounds of steel and your horse suddenly decides gravity is a suggestion. But still you enter, again and again, because tournaments are more than sport. They're politics, networking, a chance to show your worth in front of lords, ladies, and anyone with enough coin to sponsor a campaign. You win, and doors open. Titles, land, invitations to sit at the high table. You lose and, well, you get to limp back home and practice your modest smile. And of course, you get prizes. Gold, horses, armor, sometimes even captured opponents' gear. Yours to keep or ransom back. One knight made his fortune solely by winning tournaments and selling other people's helmets. But not everyone plays fair. There are tricks. Lances shaved thinner so they break easier and score more points. Horses trained to sidestep slightly to throw off your aim. Armor secretly reinforced under the surcoat. You spot it. You try not to call it out. Because someday, you'll need the same edge. Still, the adrenaline is real. You ride out to cheers, your name echoing across the stands. For a moment, you feel like a legend, like the tales of Arthur or Roland weren't so far-fetched. Until your visor fogs up and you nearly ride into a hay bale. The crowd pretends not to notice. One winter you joust in the snow, the horses slip, the lances splinter cold and sharp, and you end the day with 3 bruised ribs and a sense of accomplishment so deep it makes the pain feel poetic. You compose a line of verse about it later. It's terrible, your squire says so, loudly. And even when you're not competing, you train, over and over. You ride towards swinging targets, practice balancing your lance, try to perfect the timing of your strike. You fall, you limp, you shout at your horse, you get better. Some knights become famous solely for their jousting, their names whispered with awe across castles. You aspire to be one of them. Not because of vanity, okay, a little vanity, but because for a moment on that field, when the world narrows to just you and your opponent, it feels pure. It doesn't matter who you're sworn to, doesn't matter if your crops failed or if your liege lord thinks you're expendable. In that instant, it's just you, the horse, the speed, and the point of impact. Later, when your body has stopped ringing like a bell, you sit on a bench by the stables, sipping wine through bruised lips, helmet resting in your lap. The sun sets over the banners, the cheers fade, and for once, the ache in your muscles feels like a medal. So as you drift off tonight, picture the sound of hooves pounding over packed earth, the bright flutter of silk flags in the wind, the nervous energy before a joust. You're not just a soldier, you're a performer, a daredevil, a knight with nerves of steel and bones that might need some mending come morning. It's the off-season. No wars, no crusades, no tournaments, no noble lords sending you halfway across the country to guard a cart of candles. You wake up in your itchy wool blanket, stare at the stone ceiling, and realize with a sinking heart, it's going to be another day of absolute medieval boredom. And don't get too comfortable though. Bandits are always lurking, and sheep don't protect themselves. When you're not bleeding for someone's border, your life as a knight is oddly domestic. You're not just a warrior, you're a land manager, a tax collector, a dispute settler, and the unwilling audience for endless village complaints about stolen ducks and suspicious potatoes. It's not glamorous, not at all. You start the morning with a cold splash of water on your face, followed by a bowl of porridge that tastes like beige. You might spar with your captain, ride the perimeter of your lands, or check in with your steward. By mid-morning, you're breaking up a fight between 2 farmers over a pig that allegedly winked at the wrong time. This is your reality. Hours in the saddle, slow circuits around muddy fields, and the constant hum of livestock in your ears. You've never felt so heavily armored, and yet so spiritually unwhelmed. Historians still argue whether knights truly spent most of their time in battle, or if daily knightly life was more about politics, estate maintenance, and dressing wounds caused by slipping on cabbage. Your sword doesn't see much action, unless you count using it to open a particularly stubborn wine barrel last week. And your lance? It's gathering dust. You feel guilty sometimes, like you should be off smiting something, but the peasants seem very happy that you're not. Still, you're on duty. Bandits aren't mythical creatures. They're real, they're desperate, and they don't follow a schedule. You ride out occasionally with a patrol of men at arms to chase rumors of stolen sheep or someone robbing travelers on the old Roman road. The chase is rarely exciting, usually muddy, always exhausting. Sometimes you catch someone, a skinny man with a rusty knife and one boot, who panics and runs straight into a bush. You sigh, tie him up, and decide how lenient you feel today. He's hungry, not evil. You give him bread. Your squire calls you soft. You send him to clean the latrines as punishment. Quirky tidbit. Some knights pass the time playing an early version of chess, though your squire swears it was just called boredom, with tiny pieces. You try it. You accidentally win by knocking all the pieces over with your elbow. You declare yourself a grandmaster. On particularly slow days, you train. Sparring matches in the courtyard, practicing your sword strokes against stuffed straw men until the hay explodes everywhere and your shoulder aches. You've developed a technique your squire calls the angry flour sack, which is both effective and embarrassing. You also train your squire, reluctantly. He's gangly, enthusiastic, and somehow manages to hit himself in the shin with a training mace again. You fix his stance, remind him to breathe, and quietly admire his persistence. You see a little of your younger self in him, minus the constant sneezing and fondness for onion stew. And then there's boredom's worst enemy, chores. You inspect the granaries, check the well, watch the blacksmith hammer out a horseshoe for 20 minutes because apparently that's interesting now. You try carving a wooden figure. It ends up looking like a badly melted goat. Your steward politely says it has character. To spice things up, you occasionally host guests, another knight, a bored cousin, a traveling merchant who swears he has silk from the east and a magical comb that makes any horse behave. You buy it, you try it. Your horse bites it in half. Feasts during peacetime are quieter, smaller. You sit at the head of your own table, sipping ale, pretending not to notice that the chicken is undercooked again. Your cook is passionate, but deeply untrained. One night, you find mint in your stew. The mint apologizes. At night, you take long walks along the ramparts. The stars blink above. The wind hums through the gaps in the stone. You look out at the fields below, your land, your people, your tiny slice of the world, and you wonder, what's coming next? Surely it can't be this quiet forever. But sometimes you need the quiet. After years of blood, screams and shattered shields, a slow morning with tea and slightly stale bread is beautiful. Even the distant yelling of your squire after falling into the well again is oddly comforting. Still, danger doesn't stay away forever. One crisp autumn morning, a messenger rides in, cloak flapping, breathless. There's trouble on the edge of your lands, bandits again, or maybe just hungry villagers with desperation in their eyes. You don your armor. It still fits, mostly. You mount up, your destrier shifting beneath you like he remembers what this means. You ride out, the rhythm of hooves under you, the clang of your sword on your hip, the scent of morning grass, cold and damp and full of tension. Suddenly, you're a knight again. Not just a glorified manager with a sore back and 2 goats named after your least favorite uncles. The clash is brief. Scared men, ragged, wielding sticks and blunt blades. You don't kill them. You drive them off, warn them, toss them bread. You know the line between bandit and peasant is thinner than people like to admit. You return home with mud on your boots and satisfaction in your chest. The quiet has value, but but so does the reminder of what you trained for, who you are. So tonight, as your mind eases into sleep, picture yourself leaning against a stone wall, helmet in your lap, listening to the crackle of a fire and the distant, peaceful sound of sheep bleating under a full moon. The war will come again, but for now, you've earned the silence. You're standing in the village square, boots muddied, cloak draped just so, trying your best to look both noble and vaguely threatening. The peasants have gathered. They're quiet, watching, and frankly, they're not thrilled to see you. You're a knight, and to them, you're the guy who shows up twice a year to collect taxes, ride their best ox into the ditch, and occasionally commandeer someone's hayloft during a campaign. You are not the hero of this story, not down here. The truth is, the relationship between knights and peasants was complicated. On paper, you're their protector. You defend their land, their homes, their grain stores. You are the armored arm of justice and peace. But in practice, you're the guy in shiny metal who demands a quarter of their harvest and eats half their cheese during inspections. Historians still argue whether peasants genuinely respected their local knights or merely tolerated them out of fear. The answer, predictably, is both. You ride through their fields and they bow. You attend church and they make room in the pew. But when your back is turned, they mutter. Because while you recite chivalric oaths, they're out here trying to survive bad weather, cruel landlords, and the yearly game called, "Will the wheat make it?" And then there's the taxes. Oh, the taxes. You don't set them. That's your lord's job. But you enforce them. And that means making sure every household delivers its grain, poultry, or coin on time. You're not cruel about it, usually. You don't like hauling off someone's goat just because their harvest was poor. But rules are rules, and sometimes goats are the only option. Quirky tidbit. In one particularly unlucky village, a knight accepted payment in eels. 800 eels. No one knows what he did with them. But the local tavern suddenly had fish stew on the menu for 3 months straight. You try to be kind. You ride slowly through the village, nodding politely, stopping to pet the occasional dog, even though one of them once stole your glove and buried it. You ask about the harvest. You smile at the children, who stare at your sword like it's a dragon's tooth. But kindness has limits. When tempers rise, and someone dares to speak out, maybe they accuse your steward of skimming or question the fairness of a toll, you have to respond. Calmly, yes. Firmly, absolutely. Because if you look weak, you lose control. And once control slips, chaos walks in right behind it. Sometimes, you're summoned to settle disputes. You sit in the manor hall, listening to 2 farmers argue over who owns a piglet that wandered across the boundary line. They shout, they wave their arms, one of them starts crying. You nod thoughtfully, stroke your chin, and award the pig to the third neighbour, who is quietly watching from the back. Justice, knight style. And then there are the festivals, the times when the village lets loose. Maypole dances, harvest feasts, winter bonfires. You're invited, technically, but you always feel like a guest at someone else's family reunion. You stand off to the side with a goblet, smiling awkwardly as peasants throw flour at each other and dance barefoot in the mud. If you try to join in once, your boots sink 6 inches deep. Your cloak catches fire from a torch, and a small child steals your belt pouch. You laugh. Everyone laughs. You laugh a little less when you find out your pouch had your favorite dice in it. Still, you see their lives, up close. You walk their fields, sit in their kitchens, accept cups of cider that taste more like vinegar and gratitude than anything else. And you understand something important. You may be a knight, but you're not that different. They bleed like you, they pray like you, they bury their dead and fear the plague, and dream of better weather, just like you. The armor separates you, yes. The title, the sword, the right to sit in the front row at mass. But underneath it, you're both just trying to survive a century that isn't all that kind. Sometimes you help in secret. You leave extra grain at a widow's door. You turn a blind eye when a farmer reclaims some timber he wasn't technically allowed to take. Your squire complains. You ignore him. Other times, you fail them. You're gone when bandits strike. You can't stop a flood. You deliver bad news with your helmet in your hands, hating the way their faces fall. They still thank you. They still call you sir. But you feel the weight of it for days. And then there are times you surprise them. You fight off a raider, you patch a broken cart, you carry an injured boy 3 miles back to the village healer, and for a moment, just a moment, they don't see the taxman or the armored stranger. They see you. Peasants weren't passive. They grumbled. They resisted. They adapted. They weren't just characters in the background of your story. They were the ones growing the food, tending the fires, rebuilding the roads after your campaign trampled through. They were the reason the realm functioned at all. So yes, they eyed you with suspicion. They knew that the same man who blessed their bread one day could be ordered to seize their ox the next. You were a contradiction in polished steel, their protector, their burden, their hope, their fear. And you knew it. Tonight, as the world quiets and your thoughts drift, picture a narrow dirt road lined with low stone walls, where a knight rides slowly past a row of cottages. Children wave, old women watch from doorways, a dog barks, then immediately regrets it, and in the fading light, a man in steel and a man in straw share a nod that says, "We're still here, still standing." The stairs are narrow and steep and winding and made of stone. You're sweating through your gambeson, clanking with every breath, trying not to think about the 50 pounds of armor currently conspiring against your legs. You reach for the wall, find nothing but air, and mutter something that definitely isn't in the chivalric code. Because, surprise, medieval staircases were not designed for knights. Here's the thing they don't teach you in page school. Once you're wearing full plate armor, everything becomes harder. Sitting, standing, turning your head, and absolutely, unequivocally, climbing stairs. But here you are, trudging upward in your steel cocoon, thighs screaming, helmet bouncing slightly with each step like an obnoxious metronome. One more floor, you think, just one. Your breath fogs the inside of your visor, your knees creak, and your left pauldron keeps snagging on the wall. You haven't even seen the enemy yet. You're just trying to make it to the tower without collapsing in a heap. Quirky tidbit. Some castles actually built spiral staircases that wound clockwise, specifically to favor right-handed defenders. So if an attacking knight came up the stairs, his sword arm was cramped against the inner wall, while the defender could slash freely from the higher step. That's right. The stairs themselves wanted you to fail, and you feel it. Every muscle, every buckle. You start wondering if the real reason knights charged into battle was just to avoid ever having to climb another staircase. Once you finally reach the top, you don't look noble. You look like a startled turtle in a full-body sauna. You wheeze. Your squire pretends not to laugh. You seriously consider removing your greaves just to stretch out your legs. But there's a reason you climb. From the tower you can see it all. The courtyard below, speckled with chickens and errant prentices. The far-off fields of wheat waving in the breeze. The thin thread of the river, glinting in the sun. The world feels quiet from up here. Still, for a moment, the weight of your armor is forgotten, until your stomach growls, and you remember you have to get down again. Going downstairs in armor is, if anything, worse. Your feet feel twice as heavy, you can't see the next step, your balance is off, and if your toe catches the edge of a stair, that's it. You're a human trebuchet, and your poor squire is about to catch you with his ribcage. You try sidestepping, shuffling, pretending you're just inspecting the masonry. It helps. A little. Your dignity, however, is completely gone by step 7. Historians still argue how often full plate armor was worn during day-to-day castle life. Some say it was reserved for battle and tournament. Others point to chroniclers, describing knights sitting in councils or courts wearing at least partial armor, especially when political tensions ran high. You tend to err on the side of, wear just enough to look impressive, but not enough to die on a staircase. Of course, your castle wasn't designed with your thighs in mind. Narrow passageways, uneven steps, low ceilings. Your helmet has kissed more beams than your actual wife. One knight in your company got stuck in a stairwell corner for 20 minutes. He blamed a tight breastplate. Everyone else blamed the 3 extra pies at lunch. You sometimes wonder how the architects of these castles slept at night, probably snickering into their pillow, knowing they'd forced generations of knights to waddle like overstuffed ducks through the very structures they defended. And yet, you love your castle. Its flaws, its quirks, its odd angles and impossible stairs, because even though it tries to murder your knees, it's yours. You know every creak, every cold draft, every oddly shaped step that needs just the right angle to avoid disaster. You try to train your squire in stair etiquette. Step lightly, lead with the heel, don't lock the knees, and whatever you do, don't run. He listens, and one day, he bolts up the tower with a tray of food and trips halfway, launching your stew into orbit. The hallway still smells faintly of turnip. During sieges, the tower stairs become strategic choke points. You station archers at the top, oil pots nearby. You know that if it comes to it, these miserable stone spirals could mean the difference between victory and a smouldering ruin. You respect the stairs, you loathe them, but you understand them. There is something almost symbolic about the effort. Every climb is a reminder of the burden you carry, not just armor, but responsibility, nobility, duty, and, occasionally, a tray of dumplings your steward made with extra garlic. You carry it all, up and down, again and again. Still, there are times, rare and fleeting, when you embrace the absurdity. Like the time you raced another knight to the top of the tower in full armor for a bet. You both collapsed at the summit, laughing like fools, legs twitching. The loser had to muck out the stables for a week. It was you. And there was the time you carried a wounded soldier up the stairs on your back, plate mail and all, because no one else could. You didn't think, you just moved. Your thighs hated you, but the man lived. Sometimes, that's all that matters. So tonight, as you settle into the softness of your bed, free from straps and hinges, imagine a narrow stairwell spiraling into the sky. You ascend, one step at a time, heavy but steady, rising through shadow and echo toward the open air. Your breath is calm, your balance sure, and at the top, peace, wind, light, the long view, and no one's laughing at you, not even your squire. The church bells toll, low and slow. You wake before dawn, cold breath clouding the air, hands stiff with the kind of ache that settles deep into the bones. But you pull on your cloak, murmur a half-remembered prayer, and shuffle toward the chapel like everyone else in the garrison. Today is a holy day, again. Honestly, it feels like every other day is a holy day, feast day or some kind of saints-mandated, don't eat me but do smile, but do confess sort of ordeal. Welcome to the deeply religious and frequently guilt-laden life of a medieval knight. You may be a warrior, but you're also expected to be a man of God. The church demands it, your oath requires it, and your mother, may she rest in peace, would be very disappointed if you skipped Mass 3 days in a row. Chivalry, as they keep reminding you, is about faith as much as fighting. You kneel, you bow, you cross yourself before duels, you pray before battles. You confess your sins, sometimes sincerely, sometimes just to get the priest to stop glaring at you. But here's the real kicker. All this prayer, all this fasting, all this ritual doesn't stop you from getting sick. Often. Because faith may feed the soul, but it does nothing against the Black Death. Historians still argue about the exact routes and spread patterns of the plague, but one thing's certain. When it arrived, it didn't care how many battles you'd won or how much Latin you could chant. Knight, peasant, bishop, noble. It took you just the same. You remember the first time it came near, a coughing stable hand, a feverish cook, whispers in the halls. Someone barricaded the chapel doors and buried the dead at midnight. After that, nothing felt clean again. It hit your village hard, half the population gone in weeks. You rode through afterwards, streets empty, shutters nailed shut, dogs wandering without owners. Even the rats looked confused. And worst of all, There was nothing to fight, no enemy to charge at, no monster to slay, just invisible death, carried in the air, on fleas, in breath and sweat and sorrow. You cleaned your sword every day anyway. Old habits die hard. Quirky tidbit. Some people believed the plague was caused by bad air and carried posies of herbs around their necks to ward it off. You tried it. The herbs wilted in the heat. You got laughed at. But hey, you smelt better than usual for a few hours. When not dodging disease, your religious obligations remain relentless. You attend Mass. You give alms. You fast on Fridays. You abstain from meat on saint days, of which there are approximately 4,000. Every time you turn around, someone's lighting a candle for Saint whoever. And confession? Let's just say you've gotten good at abbreviating. You rattle off the usual sins: pride, wrath, perhaps that time you accidentally ran down a bishop's servant while chasing a chicken. The priest sighs. You promise to be better. You ride off and try not to yell at your squire before lunch. But there are moments when the faith feels real. Like on cold mornings when the light filters through stained glass and paints the stone floor in soft reds and blues. When a hymn rises from the choir with such aching beauty, you forget your bruises. When a dying man grips your hand and whispers a prayer that you didn't even realize you remembered. Or when you bury a comrade. You dig the grave. You kneel beside it. You listen to the priest speak of heaven and mercy and eternal rest. You toss the first clump of earth onto the shroud, your heart heavy, your armor somehow tighter around your chest. You don't cry, but you remember. And in those quiet, bitter hours you pray, not because the code demands it, but because you need to, because you don't know what else to do with the weight you carry. Of course, not every knight is devout. Some drink through Mass, some bribe priests to erase their more colourful sins. Others build chapels just to earn enough heavenly points to offset decades of pillaging. You once met a knight who confessed to the same sins every week, with such enthusiasm you suspected he was just showing off. But the church keeps score, and you do care about your soul, at least a little, because when you lie awake at night, memories creeping in like frost through the cracks in the wall, you wonder, did I do right by them, by God, by myself? That's the real weight of being a knight. It's not just armor and swordplay. It's the expectation that you're good, that you're righteous, that when the time comes, you'll stand before your Maker with more to your name than a trail of broken spears and sarcastic prayers. You're not perfect. Far from it. You've made mistakes, hurt people, ignored suffering, laughed when you shouldn't have, killed when you didn't have to. But you also lifted others, shared food, protected the weak, cared quietly when no one expected you to. The priests say that's what counts. Maybe they're right. So tonight, as your eyes close and the world softens around the edges, picture a candle flickering in a quiet chapel. The air smells of incense and old stone. You kneel, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. The war will come again. The plague may return. But for now, in this moment, you are at peace. The fire crackles low in the hearth. You've just finished recounting your last skirmish to a cluster of squires who hang on every word like you're the bard himself. You sip your wine, lean back, and someone asks, with a smirk, "Of course. So, do women ever become knights?" You nearly snort, because officially, no. Technically, rarely. But secretly, absolutely. The image of a medieval knight is almost always male, bearded, bellowing, possibly bleeding, and very loud about honor. But history, as it turns out, has cracks. And through those cracks slipped a few women who didn't wait for permission to pick up a sword. You've heard the stories. Most knights have. The noble woman who held a castle under siege for 3 weeks with a handful of archers and a glare that could stop a charging ox. The lady who rode into battle in her husband's armor and wasn't discovered until someone tried to flirt with her mid-siege. Surprise. Historians still argue how many women actually held knightly rank or wielded weapons in the field. Some records are murky, others were deliberately erased. After all, it's hard to maintain the illusion of manly dominance when Lady Joan just outdueled half your garrison in front of the bishop. But there were women knights, real ones, not just in disguise, not just anomalies, but officially recognized. Take the Order of the Hatchet in Spain, founded in the 12th century to honor the women who defended the town of Tortosa against a Moorish attack. Those women were knighted, given privileges, respected. You mention this at the table. One of the squires chokes on his stew. Quirky tidbit. The name Order of the Hatchet came from the actual hatchets the women used to fight off invaders. Not symbolic, real, sharp, and absolutely terrifying when swung with maternal rage. And let's not forget the battlefield women who didn't wait for accolades. Women who led troops, ran supply lines, snuck into enemy camps, and held swords like they were born with them. They rarely made it into the songs, but you know better. You've seen the scars. You remember one, a woman named Elaine, trained in secret by her uncle, a knight turned monk. She could ride better than half your company, shoot an arrow through a coin at 50 paces, and disarm a man twice her size. She dressed plainly, spoke little, but when the northern lords attacked, she stood beside you, sword in hand, cloak whipping in the wind. She fought like it was personal. Maybe it was. Afterward, the men whispered, said it wasn't proper, said she shouldn't have been there. But you'd charge into battle beside her any day. You'd tell the squires that. You say her name with the same respect you'd give any knight. More, probably. But here's the thing. Titles were sticky. Even the women who fought weren't always called knights. Lady of the Manor, Defender, Mistress of the Blade, all impressive, all real. But the word knight, that stuck to men like bad wine stains. Yet some women demanded it anyway. They trained, they studied, they wore armor. Sometimes they even fought in tournaments, under false names, under heavy helms, under the assumption that no one would guess. And many didn't. Until someone lost, and then suddenly the rules mattered again. You smirk into your cup, remembering the time Sir Reynard unmasked after winning a joust and revealed herself to be Lady Alice of Rokesby. The audience gasped. Someone fainted. The losers sulked for a week. Alice just bowed and rode off, prize purse tied to her saddle. Legend. It wasn't always glamorous, though. For every celebrated story, there were women who were scorned, punished, or simply erased. Their names scratched out, their deeds claimed by others. The church wasn't always thrilled, nor were half the noble lords who saw women as property, not warriors. But still, they came. Quietly, boldly. They trained in shadowed courtyards, wielded wooden practice swords behind locked doors, whispered battle plans to their brothers, taught themselves to ride in dresses that hid bruised knees. They knew the code. They knew the cost. You once spoke with a nun who had served as a healer in 3 sieges. She knew anatomy better than most battlefield surgeons. She told you, in a rare flash of candor, that she'd held a sword once. Just once. During the 2nd siege, when the gate fell and no one else was left to fight. She said it felt like lifting truth in your hand. You never forgot that. Even now, in your own hall you see it. The niece who sneaks into the armory to test the weight of your sword. The lady who rides harder and faster than the hunting party dares. The steward's daughter who fixes your saddle leather better than your smith. Potential. Hidden. Quiet. Waiting. Maybe you don't call them knights, but you know better. So tonight, you leave a wooden practice sword outside the great hall. No questions, no speeches, just the unspoken offer. By morning it's gone, and you smile. As you settle into bed, eyelids heavy, imagine a quiet courtyard under the stars. A lone figure moves through sword drills, cloak swirling, breath steady. Her blade glints in the moonlight. Her steps are sure. She doesn't need a title. She already knows who she is. The torchlight flickers off the stone walls as you count out your coins. 1, 2, 3. That's it. That's all you have. Enough to buy a loaf of bread and maybe a decent comb for your horse. Maybe. You sigh, tip your pouch upside down just in case a stray silver's hiding. Nope. Just a pebble, and something that might once have been cheese. Being a knight, you were told, meant wealth, land, jewels, servants. But the truth? For a lot of you it meant debt, pawned armor, and an elaborate system of pretending you had more florins than you actually did. Not every knight was rich, not even close. Sure, some had estates the size of villages and wardrobes full of silk, but most had a small plot of land, a damp manor house with a gleamy roof, and an old warhorse that eats like a baron but runs like a mule. Historians still argue about how many knights actually lived lavishly versus how many scraped by. The romantic image persists: grand halls, golden goblets, jewels inlaid into sword hilts. But most of your daily reality involves budgeting for salt. The equipment alone could bankrupt a small family. Armor, expensive. Good armor, unimaginably expensive. A custom-fitted suit of plate mail costs more than your father's entire wheat harvest. That's assuming you even own your armor. Many don't. Five it. Borrow it. Or, liquidly. You once met a knight who only wore the top half of his suit because the bottom half still belonged to his cousin. You said nothing. You just tried not to stare too hard at his suspiciously baggy trousers. Quirky tidbit. Knights would sometimes rent armor for tournaments, the way people today rent tuxedos. You show up, sign a pledge promising not to dent it too badly, and hope you don't get unhorsed into a fountain. Again. And then there's the horse. A proper destrier isn't just rare, it's ruinous. Feeding, grooming, shoeing, it's a full-time investment. You once had to sell a silver goblet just to cover your horse's winter oats. He did not appreciate it, but his coat was very shiny. Then come the servants. Your squire, your groom, your cook, even a small household eats through your purse like termites through parchment. You're responsible for their wages, their food, their occasional accidental crossbow damage in the cellar, and if you fall behind on payment, they get inventive. You've walked in on your squire trying to rent out your old shield to passing merchants. Just for photos, he said. You've never felt poorer or more amused. But still, appearances must be kept, because status is everything. You polish your sword even if it's nicked. You wear your best cloak even if the hem is secretly patched with an old bedsheet. You ride into court with your head high, praying no one notices the faint smell of boiled onions coming from your tunic. Nobility is 20% bloodline, 80% bluffing. And bluffing isn't just for clothes. You attend feasts, tournaments, ceremonies, all of which require gifts. That's right. You're expected to bring offerings, a hunting falcon, a rare spice, a modestly jeweled brooch. Where do you get these things? You trade. You borrow from that one knight who inexplicably always has 5 rings on each hand. But despite the struggles, you manage. You find ways. You develop a keen sense for which debts can be delayed, which nobles are generous with loans, and which barrels of wine are, technically, shared property. You learn to sew your own tunics, sharpen your own blades, and bargain with traveling merchants like a fishwife at a summer market. You also learn what really matters. When you're camped under the stars with your men sharing a hunk of cheese and a joke, you don't care about embroidery. When you hold the line in battle with your squire at your back and your warhorse beside you, you're not thinking about unpaid taxes. You're thinking about the people beside you. Sometimes, when things get especially tight, you take other work, escort duty, treasure hunting, internightly mediation, which is basically babysitting 2 armored toddlers arguing over a bridge toll. It's not glamorous, but it keeps your people fed. And if all else fails, you fight for ransom. It's a grim tradition, but a practical one. Capture a noble enemy in battle, and you can demand a fee for his return. A good ransom can keep your manor running for a year. A great ransom can buy you new armor, a new horse, and the satisfaction of seeing your cousin's face when he realizes you finally outrank him. You've even been ransomed yourself. Once, maybe twice. Okay, 3 times. But the third one barely counts. It's a humbling experience. You sit in a tent, drink watered wine, and try to guess how much your lord really thinks you're worth. Spoiler. It's never quite enough. Yet, despite the poverty, the uncertainty, and the constant smell of boiled cabbage, you stay in the fight. Because being a knight isn't about riches. It's about responsibility, reputation, legacy. And yes, occasionally eating cold stew for breakfast, while your squire counts your remaining coins and says, "Well, we might make it to Thursday." You laugh, because what else can you do? So tonight, as you lie in your modern bed with your modern bank account, spare a dream for the broke knight dozing in a drafty hall, his purse empty, his boots worn, but his heart weirdly full. Because even if the coins are few, the courage never runs out. The fire's out, again. You're half-dressed, half awake, and entirely certain that your squire just dropped your breastplate down the stairs. You hear a clatter, a muffled curse, and what sounds suspiciously like someone stepping in porridge. You sigh. Your squire hates you. Or maybe he doesn't. But after years of hauling your armor, patching your tunics, and removing that one weird splinter from your foot after the boar hunt, the line between loyalty and loathing has definitely blurred. Squires are supposed to be devoted, trained, the noble apprentices to chivalry, but in reality, they're gangly adolescents with too much energy and not enough sense. And this one, the one assigned to you, has a knack for finding every pit, puddle, and patch of nettles in a 50-mile radius. You remember being a squire. You remember how much you hated your knight's snoring, how you prayed he'd forget his dagger so you could sleep an extra 10 minutes. You also remember how he once made you hold a torch while he wrestled a drunk monk. So yes, perhaps the hatred is part of the job. Your own squire, let's call him Edwin, is always 5 seconds late and full of opinions. On your armor, on your saddle, on your life choices. You once caught him talking to your warhorse as if he were the knight. The horse didn't argue. Edwin's job is exhausting. Wake before you, dress you, feed you, polish everything you own, clean it again after you fall in the mud, hand you the right weapon at the right time, fetch your food, run errands, attend your sparring, and then listen to you snore all night while sleeping on a blanket that smells like sadness. Historians still debate whether squires genuinely looked up to their knights or simply endured them like particularly well-armored nightmares. The answer? Depends on the knight. Quirky tidbit. Some squires took revenge by placing a small dead fish under their knight's saddle blanket. You never proved it was Edwin, but you did ride a very angry 3 hours that day, and nearly passed out from the smell. Still, for all the rolled eyes and heavy sighs, you need him. He knows which buckle always sticks. He remembers where you put that spare dagger. He checks the girth strap before you mount up, not because he wants to help, but because if you fall off again, he has to explain it to the steward. You've taught him to fight, to polish steel until it reflects the clouds, to use a whetstone with purpose, not panic. You've seen his bruised fingers, his scraped knuckles, the quiet pride when his knot held during that last storm. And he's seen you in your worst moments, bloody, exhausted, furious, afraid. He's the one who stayed up while you groaned through a fever. He's the one who carried your boots when your leg was broken. He's the one who didn't say a word when you wept after burying your friend. Sometimes, in the quiet after camp settles, you catch him watching the fire, sword across his knees, jaw clenched like he's imagining his own future, one where he rises, gets his own squire, his own armor, his own impossible expectations. You wonder if he'll remember you. You certainly remember your knight. Sir Gawain, loud, smelled like onions. But he taught you to read a battlefield the way a monk reads scripture, taught you never to ride into a skirmish without checking the wind, taught you how to bow to a queen without looking like you dropped something. You hated him sometimes, adored him others. When he fell, lanced through the chest, you held his hand as he died. You cleaned his sword, carved his name into the hill, told your squire he was the best man you ever knew. It wasn't entirely true. That's the bond. Squire and knight. Not quite father and son. Not quite master and servant. Something messier, closer, sharpened by fire and fatigue. You argue with Edwin, constantly. He forgets your gauntlets. You forget his name when you're angry. He mumbles, "Yes, sir," with the same tone you once used when you meant, "I hope you fall off your horse." But one day, he'll kneel for the accolade. One day, he'll be the knight. You'll pass him your old sword. You'll adjust his cloak before the ceremony, and try not to cry when he finally stands taller than you. And maybe, just maybe, he'll get a squire exactly like himself. Tonight, after a long day of nothing going quite right, you let Edwin sleep a little longer. You lay your own sword across the table. You hang your own helm on the hook. He deserves the rest. So do you. Because you're not just training a servant, you're shaping the next you. Hopefully, with fewer opinions about stew. As you close your eyes, imagine a flickering fire, 2 sleeping forms in mismatched blankets, and the quiet, unspoken promise between them. I'll carry you until you're ready to carry others. You stare at your reflection in the polished metal of your shield. The face looking back isn't what it used to be. More lines, a hint of grey in your beard, a stiffness in your joints that never quite goes away, no matter how long you soak in that absurdly cold stream behind the chapel. You are a knight, but no, and you've started to think, what comes next? The truth is, there's no clear retirement plan for someone like you. Knights don't have pensions. There's no knightly condo village where you can whittle spear tips and compare battle scars. No, when your knees start to complain and your sword starts to feel heavier than it should, you face the 2 classic options. The monastery, or madness. You've seen both. You remember Sir Aldred, brilliant rider, terrifying in a joust. He walked away from it all at 40, gave away his armour and joined a quiet abbey in the hills. Said he wanted peace, said he wanted silence. You visited him once. He was making candles and praying 6 times a day. You didn't recognize the voice at first, too calm. Then there was Sir Bolian. Couldn't let go. Kept fighting long past his prime. Took a job guarding merchant caravans. Picked fights in taverns. Talked to himself. Said he saw ghosts. Died swinging a wine bottle at an imaginary dragon. Historians still debate what retirement even looked like for medieval knights. Some took positions in royal courts, became advisors, judges or diplomats. Others joined religious military orders, and a surprising number just disappeared. Slipped into quiet obscurity, remembered only when their old squires stumbled across their names in a faded scroll. You haven't decided yet. Your body's sending messages, your sword arm aches in the cold, your left shoulder pops every time you lift your shield, and your last ride, you needed help dismounting. You blamed the saddle. Your squire prisoner argue, but he definitely smirked. You've tried to scale back, delegate, send the younger knights to do the patrolling, the border skirmishes, the boar hunts. You watch from the tower now, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk too tired to fly. But inside the fire still flickers. You keep your armor clean, you still polish your blade. Sometimes, after everyone's asleep, you slip into the courtyard and spar with the training dummy under moonlight, just to feel the weight again, just to remember. And you still get called upon. A noble dispute, a bandit problem, a ceremony that needs someone impressive looking to stand beside the archbishop. You ride out, slow but steady. You still carry presence, even if your knees click like old hinges. You've started writing more, letters to old comrades, notes for your squire, maybe a record of your campaigns. You're not much of a writer, but you figure someone ought to remember how it really happened. Not the bardic fluff, the truth, the rain, the fear, the bread that broke your tooth. Sometimes you think about taking the robe, joining a monastery. You've always liked the quiet. You could copy manuscripts, tend a garden, maybe teach the younger monks how to swing a staff without hitting themselves in the face. But other times, you wonder if you'd go mad without the clatter of armor, the smell of a stable, the feeling of leather reins in your hand. You've been a knight longer than you've been anything else. Who would you even be without it? Quirky tidbit. Some knights retired to hermitages, not abbeys. Just little stone huts near a chapel, living alone with a goat, a Bible, and whatever thoughts they couldn't shake. It sounds peaceful. Also, very damp. You joke about retiring to a tavern, buying a stool in the corner, telling stories in exchange for ale. Your squire says you already do that, just without the ale. You've considered mentoring full-time, training squires, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to endure, how to be. Because there's so much they don't teach in the songs. How to choose mercy, how to lose with honor, how to bandage a wound when your hands are shaking. Maybe that's your legacy. Not the lands, not the sword, not the coat of arms, but the ones who come after. The ones who remember your voice, your laugh, the way you once lifted a dying man onto your horse and rode all night. That and the time you knocked a baron into a puddle at court and pretended it was part of the ceremony. Still your proudest moment. So you wait, you watch, you live, between battles now. Internal ones. Stay or go, teach or hide, fight or fade. And one day soon you'll decide. Maybe you'll take the robe, maybe you'll hang up your sword and finally fix that leak in the roof. Or maybe, just maybe you'll keep riding, slower, wiser, but still forward. Tonight, as sleep wraps around you like a worn wool cloak, picture a knight standing at the edge of a field. The grass is high, the road is long. Behind him, echoes. Ahead, silence. And in his hand, the sword still fits. Barely. But it fits. You sit beside the hearth, armor stowed away, sword resting on the mantel like an old, well-loved lie. A bard in the corner is singing some dramatic nonsense about a dragon-slaying knight named Valentine the Valiant. You sip your drink. You don't interrupt. But you know the truth. The stories never quite get it right. They sing about knights in gleaming armor, always noble, always clean, always on the winning side of whatever battle the rhyme demands. They don't mention the worms, or the guilt, or the stairs. They skip right over the cold baths, the smashed toes, the peasant stares that sit in your stomach long after the feast ends. But the songs live on, and so do you. You've become legend in small ways. Children in nearby villages shout your name when they play sword fight. The blacksmith named his dog after you. A tapestry in your lord's hall shows you standing heroically atop a hill, sword raised, cape fluttering impossibly in the wind. You remember that battle. You were actually face down in a ditch, vomiting after a blow to the rib. Still, it looks nice. The romantic image of the knight has taken on a life of its own. Gleaming armor, gallant rescues, faithful steeds and fragrant roses. The world remembers the shine, not the sweat. The charge, not the limp afterward. Historians still argue whether this glossy legacy was shaped more by bards, chroniclers, or desperate nobles trying to distract everyone from the taxes. Maybe all three. Maybe it doesn't matter. Because legacy isn't about truth. It's about what survived. And the knight's image has survived spectacularly. Every generation finds something to love in it. The courage, the discipline, the idea that someone would stand between danger and the defenseless, blade in hand, honor in heart, hair somehow perfect despite the helmet. That one's always confused you. But you understand the appeal. The knight is the fantasy of control in a chaotic world. A warrior bound not by greed or bloodlust, but by a code, by duty. Even if that code was mostly made up, poorly enforced, and occasionally used as an excuse to bash someone over the head in the name of God and property. You've played the part, you've lived the real thing. And you know the truth. Being a knight was never just glory. It was hard, lonely, exhausting. You spent more time on border patrols than in tournaments. You learned to sleep in wet armor. You've had fleas, burns, heartbreak, toothaches, and moments of fear so sharp they made you question your own name. You've done things you regret. You've buried men whose names you still remember in your dreams. You've made peace with enemies and enemies out of friends. And still, somehow, you're here. But more than all of that, you've protected people. Not perfectly, not always kindly, but you did it. You took the blows so someone else didn't have to. And maybe that's what it really means to be a knight. Not the songs, not the armor, but that. Quirky tidbit. Some retired knights in later centuries became schoolmasters. Can you imagine? Standing at a chalkboard, still wearing your old chainmail under your robes, yelling at 10-year-olds to stop stabbing their porridge? Glorious. As you sit quietly in your hall now, watching your squire-turned-knight bark instructions at his squire, you feel the weight of your legacy, not just in stories, but in people. The ones who watched you, learned from you, endured you. You hear them echoing your phrases, repeating your old training drills. You see your values, flawed, worn, honest, living on. And it feels strange, but good. There's a peace in being part of something larger than yourself, in knowing your dents, your bruises, your victories, your failures. They all mattered, somehow. Even if someone someday rewrites your entire life to include a dragon and a forbidden love affair with a woodland sorceress, fine, let them. You're too tired to argue. Because at the end of it all, when the lance breaks, the sword dulls, and the armor creaks with age, the knight's real strength was never in his weapons. It was in enduring. In waking up, every day, and doing the hard thing again. So tonight, as you stretch under warm covers, let your mind wander to that old castle you once defended. Picture it in twilight, the stone walls glowing amber, the banners drooping softly in the breeze, your old warhorse grazing in the distance, your sword hung above the door, untouched but never forgotten. You've done enough, Sir Knight. Sleep well. The night stretches out calm and wide. The flickering torchlight of battles past fades gently into the soft grey of memory. You've walked the long road, muddy fields, stone corridors, crowded feasting halls, and the lonely quiet of night watches. Your armor is off now, your hands are bare, you feel the warmth of a fire, low and crackling, casting its soft glow across the worn wood floor. Outside, wind hums through the trees. Not a howl, just a whisper. The sort of wind that carries the scent of pine and the sound of distant church bells. In the distance, the world goes on. Farmers tend to fields you once defended. A young squire in a neighbouring hall ties his first belt. A steward counts grain under candlelight. The land, bruised and ancient, continues its slow turning beneath the stars. And you rest. No one is calling your name. There are no horns. No banners. No lords in need of swords. Just the hush of everything settling. The final exhale of a long, full breath. Your story has weight, but now it floats, loosened from the blade, unburdened by duty. You've done your part. You've stood in the rain, climbed the stairs, protected the quiet, loved, lost, laughed at stew that moved on its own. Let it all fall away now. Let your breath slow, let your muscles soften. Let your dreams come without marching orders. No dragons to slay tonight. No bridges to guard. You've earned your rest. The story ends here. Close your eyes. Drift deep. Sweet dreams.